Welcome to Presidential Fight Club, the show that answers the question, if all 44 presidents fought each other one-on-one, who would win? Hosted by two history professors who have too much time on their hands, Scott Rank and James Early. Welcome to the final fight of the Southeastern Regional. Our two fighters are Andrew Jackson and George Washington, and they have left many presidents in their wake battered and bruised. And we've had a lot of early presidents, founding fathers, James Madison, James Monroe, Thomas Jefferson. Other later presidents, John Tyler, Andrew Johnson, some modern presidents, Woodrow Wilson, Jimmy Carter. They have all fallen to these two titans. This is going to be quite a fight. These are two presidents that I think you can make a strong case that they would be able to beat up the other one. They've fought throughout their entire lives. They're hardy. They've most likely killed people, the two of them. Definitely Jackson, Washington, in a military career as long as him. I think it'd be hard not to. Well, let's start off with the father of our country first. James, tell us about George Washington and all that he brings to the fight.
Well, there's really not a lot to say other than what we've already said, but he was a big, powerful built guy, 6'2", about 200 pounds, very muscular. He was famous for being very strong. As you mentioned before, he was a good sword fighter. He was an excellent horse rider. So he was definitely in shape, never overweight, tough until his dying day. We talked about his experience in the French and Indian War when people are dropping like flies around him, bullets are flying all around him, and he even says that it's charming. The sound of bullets whizzing around me is charming. You know, most people don't like being shot at. I just thought I'd mention that, but Washington actually kind of enjoyed it, at least as a young man. And of course, we saw his service in the Revolutionary War, how he was very resourceful in picking his battles and knowing when to fight and when not to fight. And he didn't give up at all. He refused to give up. He was not afraid to suffer cold and other deprivations. Washington, he's a winner. You know, he just wins. He lost several battles, but he won the battles that really matter. He won the Battle of Yorktown, and he just knew how to fight. He knew how to win. So he's tough. He's fearless. He's strong, and he knows how to win. That's what we've got for Washington.
Well, Jackson, there are so many stories about him, and we've talked a lot about his background. Grows up in South Carolina, father dies. This gives him a psychological impulse to constantly prove himself. When he's wrestling, if he's pinned to the ground, he gets up, he goes for another round and another round and another round, always punching above his weight. James mentioned earlier that when he's 14, he was a prisoner of war during the American Revolution. Forced marched for several miles, came down with smallpox. He's left to fend for himself on the streets of South Carolina after his mother dies. He has to bootstrap his way through life during his teenage years. He tries saddle making, school teaching, fails at all of them. He eventually gets licensed to practice law. So Jackson is somebody that political theorists and historians have called the father of Jacksonianism. And okay, of course, you're the father of something that's named after you, but what it means is Jacksonianism is a certain type of outlook in American politics. It's not so much a coherent philosophy or an ideology, but it's more like an instinct. It's a set of beliefs and emotions rather than a set of ideas. To constantly fight, to redress every wrong, to get into numerous duels. And James mentioned a duel earlier. He is believed to have gotten in as many as 100, although only, and I use only with air quotes, 14 are accounted for. Oftentimes he would call his opponent to fire first, and Jackson would sometimes take the bullet. Sometimes he would be under a bulky coat and twist his torso so that by not front facing his opponent, the bullet maybe wouldn't go straight for his heart, but might only get embedded in his rib cage, something simple. Not just undergoing vicious physical fights, but mentally, he was he had probably some of the most vicious presidential elections that any president went through. The founding fathers and the East Coast establishment hated him. Thomas Jefferson feared him. He thought that Jackson would start a war if a diplomat or a foreign head of state insulted him. So that's why the 1828 election was one of the nastiest in American history. John Quincy Adams is labeled a pimp by Jackson's hatchet men. Andrew Jackson's wife is called a whore. One paper used the go-to slur against Jackson, claiming he was of mixed blood. His mother was a common prostitute brought to this country by British soldiers, which you imagine could have rankled Jackson just a little bit. But one other story that is famous in Jackson lore is that there was an attempted assassination against him. Richard Lawrence attempted to shoot President Andrew Jackson outside of the U.S. Capitol on January 30th, 1835. The attempt failed. I forget exactly how the story goes. Do you know, James, did he have two pistols and both of them failed to fire?
The guy fired one pistol, it misfired. He tried to fire a second one and it misfired. And incidentally, later on, both pistols were fired and they worked perfectly well. So I don't know what's going on.
Call it luck, call it divine providence, both of which will help you in a fight. And the response is just classic Jackson. He gets out his cane and he's beating him fiercely until a crowd has to subdue Jackson. And Lawrence spends the rest of his life in a mental asylum. So there's the epilogue to that story. But any era in his life, from a young man pinning someone twice his weight in the frontier up to a gnarled, thin, elderly old man beating up a younger man with his cane, Jackson is the most fiery, fiercest president we've had. And I pity anyone who goes up against him in a fight. So, James, what is the result of the Southeastern Regional? Who is the victor?
This is an interesting one because as I've been thinking lately about Jackson and Washington, Washington was tough. I love Washington, but I really feel like Jackson probably would have won in a knockdown, drag-out fight. But Washington gets a lot of reputation points for being father of our country. He won this one pretty handily. He got something like 55-60% of the votes. So Washington becomes our champion.
All right. Well, there we go. We are moving right through. We've marched through the Northeastern Regional, the Midwestern, and the Southeastern Regional. In the next episode, we're going to begin with the Western Regional. So thanks for sticking through this tournament bracket, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to Presidential Fight Club. If you'd like to download your own printable bracket sheets for each regional tournament so you can guess how the tournament will go, check out presidentialfightclub.com. We'd appreciate it if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts as well. Thanks for listening, and may you fight with the stamina of Teddy Roosevelt, the courage of George Washington, and the reach of Abraham Lincoln.